Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chatham House. I'm Robin Niblett, Director of the Institute. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you here this evening, a little later than some of our usual meetings, but nonetheless, I can see from the turnout here an important event, and one that has followed a series of events that we've been able to have with Ministers of Finance from the Eurozone area and outside as well. I would say we started with the Chancellor here, George Osborne. We've had Wolfgang Schäuble speaking here, and it's our great pleasure to welcome Vítor Gaspar, the Minister of Finance of Portugal, here to Chatham House to discuss Portugal's response to the euro area crisis, fiscal consolidation and structural reform. What we're going to do is split the evening today into two halves. We will have the first half with a PowerPoint presentation and the remarks from the Minister, which will be on the record. Then when we go to Q&A, we will go into the Chatham House rule, which means that, again, you can hear, obviously you can hear it. You can hear what was said. We have a special technology here. You can use the information that you hear here, but you cannot attribute it to any individual. That goes for the Q&A as well, or their affiliation. So that applies for questions as well as for the answers from the Minister and any other comments that are made around the room. Needless to say, Portugal is in the eye of the storm. I think all euro area countries, and maybe those on the outside as well, are all circling around the eye of the storm, and this week is really a pivotal week. Maybe several other weeks have been pivotal as well, as we were discussing earlier, but this week, I think, in particular, you feel these discussions are really coming to a particular sharp head at the moment. In that context, I think Vítor Gaspar is somebody who's particularly well placed to be in the saddle in the Ministry of Finance in Portugal. He's a professor of economics. I will call him Professor Gaspar. Holds a PhD in economics from the Universidade Nova de Lisboa. But he has worked throughout, not just in the Portuguese Central Bank, where he was Director of Research, for 4 years, from October 94 to October 98. But he also then worked as Director General for Research in the European Central Bank from 98 to 2004. He was head of the Bureau of European Advisors of the European Commission from 2007 to 2010, and then became an advisor in the Ministry of Finance before taking up this position in 2011, earlier this year. He has published a lot on issues of financial stability, on other dimensions of economic policy, including, as I was discussing earlier, with Otmar Issing, no longer on the central bank, but nonetheless a well-known founder member of the European Central Bank. So particularly well placed to address these issues. Portugal, having now taken its economic and financial adjustment program funding in 2011, April of this year, 78 billion euro program, number of disbursements already made. You will be commenting on this, Minister. But as we discussed a minute ago, I think how individual governments are undertaking their structural reforms really has become central and critical to the credibility of the ability of the euro area to come out of this crisis. And I think it will be particularly interesting to hear, therefore, how Portugal is addressing the structural aspects of its reform and not just the near-term aspects of its crisis fighting. Welcome, Minister. We look forward to your remarks, and we'll then engage in question and answer afterwards. Over to you.
Thank you for your kind words. Thank you all for coming to this session and showing interest in discussing the experience of Portugal adjusting inside the euro area. The PowerPoint presentation that I have for today is too long for the allotted time. I did present it this morning, and it takes about 40 minutes to go through. The presentation will be available from the Chatham House website, so you will be able to consult it if you're interested at all, so you can go through the details later on. My plan is to take about 20 minutes so that we have ample time for debate, and that will allow us to focus on the issues which are of interest to you. So as a way of introduction, I will give you a very brief outline of how Portugal adjusted to participation in the euro area before the crisis, so that we have an idea of where challenges and imbalances came from. Then I will give you an overview of the economic and financial assistance program that has three main pillars: fiscal consolidation, financial stability, and structural transformation. But I will be jumping over the details, and I will conclude my presentation today by going through the key question, which is, how will it work? How can we be confident that the program will be successful at guaranteeing the necessary adjustment of the Portuguese economy? So that's the plan. Now, the situation that Portugal found itself at the beginning of 2011 has its roots in the process of adjusting to participation in the euro area that has marked the macroeconomic path of the country for the last 10 to 15 years. So the way we see it, the global crisis and the sovereign debt crisis in the euro area have revealed a number of structural weaknesses and macroeconomic imbalances that accumulated in the country during a long period of time. The main process which took place works more or less like the following. By participating in the euro area, a country like Portugal benefits from an access to international capital markets at better terms in terms of available quantities and costs of financing than it would have been possible if the country were to have stayed on its own and outside a monetary union. Given this lower cost of financing, the country adjusted by increasing expenditure. Households increased consumption. The household saving rate declined quite sharply. Households' indebtedness accumulated over the years. The same phenomenon happened to firms. Firms had access to financing at better terms. They could finance investment projects quite easily. They could finance their current economic activity as well, and therefore corporate indebtedness also increased quite substantially. Most of this household and corporate indebtedness was intermediated through the Portuguese banking system, and so credit and monetary aggregates increased quite sharply during the period. Now, in terms of the macroeconomic balances, this translated into a persistent current account deficit for many years, and this current account deficit in some of these years reached levels of about 10% of GDP, and the pace of decline in the net foreign asset position of the country was quite sharp, and the country's net debtor position reached very substantial levels by international standards. In the context of the global crisis, the previous Portuguese government interpreted the 2008-2009 crisis as a temporary crisis that should be met with a budgetary policy stabilization response. And so in 2009, the country engaged in sharply expansionary budgetary policy. I like to tell that the initial presentation of the 2009 budget by the government foresaw a budget deficit of 2.2% of GDP, and the outturn was a deficit of above 10% of GDP. This was, to a very large extent, a deliberate budgetary expansion, which did deliver the expected and desired Keynesian results, in the sense that Portugal in 2009 had a less pronounced than the average of the euro area recession. So the fall in economic activity in the country was less than in the euro area as a whole, and the recovery in 2010 was stronger than what occurred in the euro area. But this budgetary expansion proved unsustainable, and so eventually the country was pushed into a request for international aid in the spring of 2011. The request was made in April. The program was approved in May. And as a matter of fact, the government that asked for international help was already a caretaker government, and elections were scheduled for June 5th. So this is the little story that precedes these slides that I'm going to show you. So now we do have an economic and financial assistance program, and the program is characterized, as our host has already pointed out. The package foresees financing up to 78 billion euro for the duration of the program. The program lasts from 2011 to 2014 and does cover the general government financing needs for the period. At this point in time, Portugal has already received about 30 billion euros, and the program is reviewed on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis. And in November, we have gone through the second regular review of the program that finished successfully. And so the program is broadly on track, according to the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, which means that the staff of this institution is recommending the disbursement of the third tranche, which adds 8 billion euros to the package of external financing. Now, the program has a number of quantitative performance criteria, has a number of binding quantitative performance criteria, and those include limits on the debt, the public debt to GDP ratio and the public debt in amount, and the same for the budget deficit. There is a limit for the budget deficit, both as a percentage of GDP and in euros. Now, I think it's timely for me to be here before you, because at this point in time, we have assurances that we are going to be able to have the 2011 budget deficit below the 5.9 limit. We have just had the 2012 budget approved. The 2012 budget has to meet a deficit limit of 4.5% of GDP. That's actually quite challenging, because given the economic environment and the fact that we had some bad surprises concerning the 2011 budget outturn that had to be compensated through one-off extraordinary measures, the necessary adjustment in 2012 is quite severe. To give you an idea, the measures which are foreseen in the 2012 budget amount to something like 5 percentage points of GDP, compared to the previous year. And that is well above 8 billion euros in terms of adjustment, which for a country the size of Portugal is quite substantial. Most of the adjustment effort comes from the expenditure side. Actually, more than 2/3 of the adjustment comes from the expenditure side, and that's something which we regard as absolutely fundamental as a characteristic of the program, because empirical evidence shows that programs are most likely to be successful when they're based on expenditure cuts rather than tax increases. Another important feature of the 2012 budget is that in the year we will reach a primary surplus, which will grow gradually over time and will ensure that the public debt to GDP ratio is on a sustainable path. Now here, basically what we list is the main pillars of the program, which I've already indicated to you, are fiscal consolidation, financial stability, and structural transformation. Fiscal consolidation is what we're going to speak mostly about. Financial stability is a very important aspect because we need to keep the main functions of the financial system supporting the economy through this difficult adjustment period. And structural transformation or structural reform is one of the distinctive characteristics of our program, in the sense that it amounts to a true structural transformation, and I will indicate to you why that is particularly key in the Portuguese case. Now here what you do have is the path, some indicators of the path that I indicated to you of building up of imbalances in Portugal, basically in the run-up to the crisis. You have on the left-hand side that most of the years since the beginning of the euro, Portugal has run an excessive deficit, that is a deficit above 3% of GDP. Most of the years the deficit was close to the 3% ceiling, but still above it. And in 2009 and 2010, it was much above the ceiling, which explains the predicament we find ourselves in at this point in time. As a red line, you see the public debt to GDP ratio. You see that at the beginning it was at about 60%, which is the Maastricht debt limit. But it has unfortunately drifted up during the period, and the pace of debt to GDP increase has accelerated in the recent past, in line with the budget deficit. On the right-hand side, you have the gross external debt, which has again increased substantially, and that reflects the indebtedness of the general government, the household sector, and the corporate sector in Portugal. Okay. Now, here is a slide that I would like to explain to you a little bit in detail, because it shows something that I believe is very important in the Portuguese case, which is the private sector has shown in the past and in the current crisis a tremendous ability to adjust. So on the left-hand side, you have the experience during the IMF-sponsored adjustment program that took place in 1983, 1984. That was the last adjustment program that my country benefited from before this one. Now, there you see as a blue line the adjustment of private consumption, and if you would add a line with private investment, you would have an even more pronounced adjustment. So what you see here is that the private sector has adjusted more than the average of the economy, and certainly more than the public sector that you see as a red line in the chart. That is public consumption. Now, if you go to the right-hand side chart, what you see is the borrowing requirements by institutional sector. And this one, I must tell you, I like a lot because, again, you have the non-financial private sector in blue, and you have in red the general government. And so what you see in this picture is that already in 2009, the private sector was adjusting quite strongly. The adjustment of the non-financial private sector here is more than 6 percentage points of GDP. But what you see is that the red line basically compensated for the adjustment in the private sector. So public sector expansion, general government expansion basically offset that. And that is the phenomenon that I described to you as the one that eventually led to the unsustainable position and this request for external assistance. This is a further aspect. Now, this is the last slide that I show you before going to the three concluding slides. Here what you have is the deficit in 2011. So it will be 5.9% of GDP or lower. And then what you have is the decomposition of the effort needed in 2012. And the 3% that you have in the column, which is second to the right, in the original program, you had an adjustment of 3% required. That's in blue. Developments since then have added an additional 2.3% of GDP necessary. Most of it comes from developments in the budgetary outturn in 2011 that were compensated by temporary measures in 2011, but will have to be compensated by permanent measures in 2012 in order to put the program on a sustainable basis. Now, in the end, that means that the effort which is necessary for budgetary consolidation in 2012 is almost double what was envisaged in the original program. And so you can see that what we have in store is quite a substantial adjustment, which is explained to a certain extent by the fact that economic activity next year is forecast to be substantially lower than what was originally expected in the program. All of these slides, I'm pretty sure, are self-evident for you, so we can jump over them. And now we can concentrate on the key question: how will it work? Why am I convinced that I can persuade you that this is a credible program that will deliver the necessary adjustment? Well, first of all, in terms of budgetary consolidation, we have a medium-term program that will deliver quite substantial primary surpluses and will deliver a position of almost budget balance by 2015. The requirement of reaching a budgetary position close to balance in 2015 is actually a domestic requirement through our budgetary framework law, which requires us to have a medium-term budgetary position close to balance, and the law defines that as a deficit of no more than 0.5 percentage points of GDP. Now, that entails, in turn, quite a substantial primary surplus and is sufficient to put the general government gross debt on a downward path from 2012 onwards. Now, you can see that a substantial part of this adjustment is already well documented in the first part of my talk. So the decline in the budget deficit from 2010 to 2011 is something which is in our estimates for the budgetary outturn in 2011, and that's something that we can regard as quite certain. So indeed, the budget deficit for 2011 will be below 5.9% of GDP. And in what concerns 2012, we have just approved the budget, which is realistic based on a prudent macroeconomic scenario, and the realism of our assumptions and projections has been confirmed by the examination of the European Commission, the IMF, and the European Central Bank. The adjustment which is required in future years, so years further on and later than 2012, is much more gradual, and we are committed to doing it. So in terms of budgetary consolidation, over the course of this program, we will have eliminated the public finance imbalance that has characterized most of the period of Portuguese participation in the euro area. So this is a very important point. Another very important point is that, as I told you, the economy as a whole, not only general government but the private sector, accumulated too much indebtedness. And as I argued, the private sector started adjusting quite strongly already in 2009. The process of adjustment of the private sector and the public sector is going to continue. In accordance with our forecasts, the current account deficit will be eliminated by 2015, and the net foreign asset position of the country will be consistently improving, so the overall levels of indebtedness will be coming down because the current account is coming down, but also because the country will be diversifying its ways, its means of financing away from debt instruments and relying more on foreign direct investment and investment in equity. So by taking these two charts together, we have a situation where over the medium term, the country has eliminated two basic macroeconomic imbalances that have characterized the economy for a relatively long period of time. Now, this is my last slide, and what it basically says is the following. We have a program that protects us from the vagaries of markets from now until 2014. So in 2014, we must be back in the bond market and have access to market financing at normal terms. Therefore, on the right-hand side at the bottom, we basically say that a crucial aspect of this program is that we have to gradually build up credibility in order to make it possible for us to access markets from 2013 onwards. We are very much blessed by a broad internal consensus on the need to adjust. Something that I want to remark before I conclude is that the Portuguese did know about this adjustment program before the elections. The three largest Portuguese parties subscribed to the adjustment program. Two smaller parties did not and campaigned against the program. And in the end, Portuguese voters supported the three parties that subscribed to the program with a majority of about 80%, which is overwhelming support and overwhelming consensus. We benefit from the economic and financial assistance program because our international partners decided that we could benefit from this support for the period of the program. So we have internal consensus and we have support from our international partners. We are going to be able to deliver on the budgetary consolidation goals in accordance with the path that I outlined to you. We will deliver financial stability in accordance with a very detailed set of measures that we have in store and I didn't have time to go through. But budgetary consolidation and financial stability are necessary but not sufficient conditions to put the Portuguese economy back on a sustainable path. They're necessary but not sufficient to make the Portuguese economy a competitive economy in the global economy and European economy. But for that, we do have the agenda of structural transformation that aims at making Portugal a good location for foreign investment, a competitive location for physical and human capital. We aim to deepen our integration in the single European market. And as I indicated to you, but I cannot now go through the details, we have a set of quite comprehensive initiatives that include flexibility in labor and product markets. It includes quite an ambitious privatization program. It includes reforms in education and research and development, and even quite an ambitious reform of the justice system. So putting together the three main elements of the program, budgetary consolidation, financial stability, and structural reforms, we are indeed going to be able to be successful in our adjustment process and put Portugal back on a path to sustained growth and prosperity. Thank you very much for your attention.